Without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce Amy, our speaker. Amy is an extra help librarian with the Sonoma County Library, and she got her MLIS from San Jose State in 2019. And she has a few slides prepared for us. Sorry for my cat. She is not one of the guests. She's just very excited for this presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here in this Zoom presentation, and anyone who is watching the recording. Well, go ahead and get started. Amy, you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you to Tyrell's cat. I hope you enjoy the presentation. So I titled this as Ready for Reference 1001 Questions because I started thinking about the 1001 nights where the whole basis for those stories were to keep yourself alive. For the storyteller kept herself alive by telling 1001 tales. And I'll tell you, having worked in reference now for just a few years, I think I have hit that 1001 question mark. So this is a roundtable, and I won't talk for very long, and I do expect questions from you. But I wanted to show you kind of, you're in library school right now, and you're learning things like how to do reference interviews and really deep diving into making sure that you can understand what the patron is looking for. And you may even have these grandiose ideas of, oh, I'm going to be able to do all this research in depth for them, and they're going to be thrilled. And then you walk into work and they go, how come the printer doesn't work? or the one that I love is, what's my email password? They're for people who get on the computer and they need to get something from their email on the computer, and they have no idea how to get into their Google password or their Yahoo password, and they somehow think that we know this. But most of the questions, I will say, throughout the day tend to be these technical questions, so that you have to get really good at knowing your e-resources for the library in which you are working. You may want to brush up on things like how to use Libby. If your library doesn't offer Libby, look it up just in case, because Libby allows ebooks, e-audiobooks, movies, and the great courses. Even if you've heard of those, you can get those through Libby now as well. So one of the best things you can do is learn how to use both Apple phones and Samsung phones, because those are the two major ones that people will come with and say, how do I use this app? How do I download books onto this app? And it works a little bit differently on an Android than it does on an iPhone. So here's some more typical questions. Now, my library system has some 14 branches in it, plus a Bibliobus, which is a bookmobile, but it's a really great thing to have. And one of the library branches we have is a history and genealogy library. And so these are all actual questions that I've had. The genealogy part is really extraordinary, and we have a lot of e-resources that our library has subscriptions to: newspapers.com, Ancestry, Heritage, trying to think of, all sorts of newspaper and magazines that you can go back. And those you have to get really good at researching. Also, Find a Grave, you need to know about Find a Grave. So there's things, when you work in a public library system, or even in a special library, maybe especially in a special library, you're going to have e-resources, and you have to get familiar with as many of them as possible so that you can take your patrons' questions and be able to give them the right answers in a fairly significantly short period of time. These are actual questions. So the Gerber phone number in digits, I got a phone call. These actually all came over phone calls for me within the last few weeks. The Gerber one was a patron who doesn't have a phone that has the letters and numbers on them. So she needed to know what the numbers were for the Gerber part. And I was trying to tell her what they were, and she was getting, well, she was interrupting me a lot. And then I would get confused about which letter I had just given her the number for. And so I'd start over. And then finally she said, I want to talk to somebody else. And so I went and I got one of the other librarians. And by the time I'd explained the situation to her and she came back to the phone, the patron had hung up. So I don't know if she ever really actually got through to Gerber, but it's just one of those things that you get. Is the home I saw in a video really haunted, and do ghosts exist? So this is one where a person had seen one of those videos online about haunted houses, but it really wasn't a real home, and I had to do a great deal of looking up for this person. I think I spent a half an hour on the phone, and then I had to persuade him that yes, that my research was correct, that this home wasn't real, in fact, that they'd made it up. And whether ghosts existed was a matter of a lot of different beliefs. And so I couldn't speak to that as much. So there are things that you're not going to, know, but you have to always treat the client with a lot of respect, because it can go very badly very quickly if you don't. The next question, the what time is my doctor's appointment, was one we got the other day, and my colleague took the call. And she said to the patron, I could hear her side of things, I don't know what time your doctor's appointment is. You'll need to call the doctor. And the patron evidently said, I know what time my appointment is, but I want to make sure the doctor knows what time my appointment is. So I love that. Do you have solar eclipse glasses? We had a solar eclipse, as you may have gotten to see. I did not. And some libraries, not the ones in Sonoma County, were offering solar eclipse glasses for free. And the radio stations were saying, you can go to your library and get solar eclipse glasses. Well, they hadn't asked us, and we didn't have any. So that was rather awkward to tell people. And then we had to find places for them to go. Like the observatory had them for $2, and 7-Eleven might have, and there were others. So that was one. How many of my ancestors are buried in I think this was a cemetery in Nebraska, and I had to go, and this was one of the ones where in the history and genealogy, where I spent a good deal of time trying to figure out how many of her ancestors were buried in that cemetery. And then it turned out they were buried in 2 or 3 others as well. So there were a lot of them. And then occasionally you'll get me the demanding ones. You'll get, help me fill out this job application, which obviously you can't do, although you can guide them in how they might fill them out themselves. And read me the newspaper. That actually is by a patron who needs a lot more assistance, and she always wants us to read her the headlines of things in the newspaper, the local newspaper, over the phone, and then she'll tell us if she wants us to read any more of the article than that. And so that's something that we get almost daily. Now, I put this slide in because I wanted you to see how each day I come into the library and I've got so much energy and everything's going to turn out well. And then by lunchtime, I'm down to, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm down to a 7, and then I eat and I'm back up, and then it goes down from there till the end of the day. And it's not because I don't like my job, I really do, but it's one of those things where you have to be on point every single minute of the day, because you don't know what your questions are going to be. You don't know what the patrons are going to be like. Some of them are nicer than others. In fact, probably 95% are really, really nice, and they are patient if you can't find something right away, or if you really don't know the answer. They're polite. Then you get the ones who can be rather impatient or rude, and you still have to be polite to them. And it can be especially difficult when you're on the phone, because you can't see their body language. You may not understand them all the way. You can't, it's just a very different frame. And so the impatient and the rude ones can get really angry on occasion if you can't find the answer right away, or as soon as they'd expect. And then there's the very few that can be very bullying or threatening to you. And that's when you have to know how to take care of yourself, know your library policies, know when you can, when you need help. We have some branches where we have to have security guards in the library, and that's just the nature of things when you've got an unhoused community as large as we do in Santa Rosa area and in Sonoma County in general. When you've got not enough mental health places for people to go, they are going to be in the library for a safe space, but they may take advantage of that. And so we do have incidents where librarians have been threatened or people are endangered. But I will say that's not every day. That's not even every week. And when you're in a public library, I think it's much more common to see that sort of thing than it is in a special library. So if you are working for a hospital, or working for an orchestra, or working in the Library of Congress, you're probably not going to see the bullying, threatening part. You may not even see the angry. But it is something to consider, because as a reference librarian, you are going to interact with every single type, and you just have to keep your cool. So that's really all the slides I'd put together, and I would like to hear from you on questions you might have, things that you're learning in school that maybe I haven't covered, because I really didn't cover things that you might be learning in school. I'm interested in knowing where you're coming from and what brought you here and what questions you have. So thank you very much for listening to me.
All right, and thank you, Amy, for your presentation. We'll go ahead and start the Q&A session. You can field any and all of your questions in the chat. We'll moderate it and make sure that it's read out and give Amy a chance to respond. So please, any questions? All questions are welcome.
Oh, I see Michelle wrote Long Beach Public Library also has security guards in the building. Yes. So, Rosine, what are the tools we can learn about e-resources? What I've done in the last several months is I went through my library website and I looked at every single one of our e-resources, and it took several months to do that because we have so many. So my advice is to go to whatever, you don't even have to be in the library, but to look at several different library websites and just start exploring. I found the greatest e-resource the other day that I don't think anybody really knows about, that we have a subscription to, that's called Gale Science, or Gale Interactive Science. And interactive science not only gives you 3D elements so you can pull it apart with your cursor, and you can see all the labels of all the parts of the different, it covers anatomy, biology, chemistry, and earth sciences. And on the right panel, it has the a scholarly paper-like text, and it gives you the ability to do citations in several different iterations. It gives you quizzes. It's very interactive, and I found it to be particularly good for beginners through adepts, you know. So I've been touting that to my patrons when they've come in and asked. So let's see, does that help answer your question, Rosie? Okay, cool.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Move down
definitely.
the
Very
list.
helpful.
Okay, so Shauna, what is the best way to prepare to become a reference librarian? If you take Info 210, that is the reference and information users, I believe. I took that, and one of the projects that I had to do was go in and interview other librarians. That's a really good way to find out, you know, do interviews with people like me who live in that world. Really, any librarian that comes out of this program is automatically going to be seen as a reference librarian because you have to answer questions all day about your job or about different things, and you're learning in all your classes what the answers are to many of the things that you'll be asked. So that would be my first thing, is to talk to as many librarians as possible, and do take Info 210. All right, Jen, does your library offer Canopy? Yes, we do, and you can get great courses through that. And I love watching movies on Canopy. It's fantastic. So that is a wonderful, and I didn't know until recently that Canopy switched to a ticket instead of, they used to give you like 6 credits a month, but now it's a ticket. So you get so many tickets per item that you watch. If you watch one movie, might be worth one ticket, but the great courses are worth 5 or something like that. And you only get so many tickets in a period of time. So I thought that was really interesting. That just happened. Michelle, how do you go about assisting multiple patrons at a time? That's an interesting question, because you can't actually assist multiple patrons at one time. It's a misnomer. What you can do is to make sure that every patron that is waiting for you is acknowledged, that you acknowledge them. And our library system, every branch has a doorbell kind of thing that we can ring, and in the back, and then somebody else will come forward. And if we ring it multiple times, they know they need multiple people. So that's always very helpful. You have to remember you're part of a team. Now, if you are working as a couple of our branches or one room libraries and you are the only librarian, in that case, then I just make sure that I say to the people waiting, I'll be with you as soon as possible. And so they know that I have seen them, they are going to be helped. And if they can't wait that long, you know, I can't do anything about that. But I haven't run into any real situations, except there was a funny one so we have one branch that is in a room in a high school, and I didn't know, I'd never been to it before, and my GPS kept leading me to this high school, and I had no idea where I was supposed to go. So I called up another branch, and they told me it was in that school. But then I didn't have the instructions on how to unalarm the thing and what to do when I got inside. And so then they had to email that to me. And I was supposed to be there a good 20 minutes before opening of the branch. By the time I found the place and got in the building and unalarmed it, there were 10 minutes left. And then I realized that, yes, I hadn't even turned on the computer. and I didn't have a profile on that computer, and I didn't know how I was going to log in and get to all the stuff that you need, because there's software for Tyrell, you probably know this from working in your public library. There's certain software that you have to be able to check books in and out and all of the stuff that you need. And so I knew I was going to have to call IT. So in the middle of that, I realized I still needed to unlock the doors so people could come in, and there were already people waiting. And I couldn't find the right key to get the doors to stay unlocked. So I had to try and prop it open with it. And then there were people waiting outside. It was just a nightmare. It took me until about 3:20 that day. I had gotten there before 3. At 3:20, and finally had it all settled. But by that time, I'd already lost at least one patron who wanted to check a book out that he'd had on hold, and he just couldn't wait. So I was like, I'm sorry, you know. So you just have to laugh in those situations. It's funny afterwards, but it sure was stressful at the time. So Laura, what are your favorite parts about working reference? I just love to interact with people. And if you couldn't tell that, I have no problem at all talking in a group, talking one-on-one. And it's my favorite part, actually, is you meet people, you get to hear their stories, because it's not just a matter of, oh, you need a library card. Okay, here's a form, fill it out, and I'll pop it in, and I won't talk to you at all otherwise. You start finding out where they're from, or how long they've been in the county, or you know, all sorts of things, what their kids' names are. It's just great. And when you are meeting people where they are, that makes it all the more motivating to stay in the job too. I was helping someone the other day to find, he asked me where the books were on foreign languages and, you know, on learning them. And I was showing him, and then I started telling him about the Spanish program that I'm in, that if he was interested in learning more about that, I'd show him. And so I ended up talking to him about that and taking him to the website and telling him about the cafe that was opened near me that is for the Hispanic community, or for anyone who wishes to just speak Spanish while they're in that cafe. And so he was pretty fascinated by that. Anyway, we ended up talking for like 15 minutes when it could have been a 3-second interaction, you know. So that's my favorite part, is just being able to hear the stories and really get to know people much better. Let's see. Oh, the great Jen, was that great class? Was that Info 210? I had it with Tunyon. I forget her first name now, but she was fantastic.
Johanna.
Let's see, Rosine, absolutely right about dealing with the public in general. Oh, you did? You worked at the consulate? Wow.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to work with the general public, because you see all kinds of people arriving at the consulate, and this was consular services, not the visa department, but the consular services. And sometimes just random people come, and then you cannot say, you know, you cannot reject anyone.
Right.
So we had a guard at the door. So it's wherever you work, when you work with the public, not only in public libraries, but wherever, you know, in governmental organizations, it's going to be the same. So it's a big challenge everywhere, I guess.
It is a big challenge. Let's see. Oh, you got yelled at by a patron. Yeah, I've gotten yelled at by patrons too. It's not fun. And you just are, yeah, the trick is not to take it personally, right? But you do anyway sometimes. Let's see. Yeah, about the question about public librarians feeling that they are turning into social work without the training. Yes, I do think that, especially in the public libraries, that you're finding that more and more. We also are finding that certain branches are having trouble getting people to work there, because they know that they're not as safe for the staff. And that's certainly, that's just the reality of things right now. We have taken training on de-escalation training. We've taken, oh my gosh, and that was kind of scary too. I took that last year when we had our all staff day, and they had people talking to us about what to do if there's guns, if somebody comes in with a gun. I mean, it was really scary. As I said, fortunately, that sort of thing doesn't happen often, but we have been threatened with knives. We have had people, when we had the plexiglass up during COVID problem, we had patrons punch that really hard. Circulation staff tends to get the worst of it because they're at the front of we have two different desks in one of the branches. So the reference people are all the way in the middle of the library, and the circ people are at the beginning. And yeah, there've been definitely scary incidents. So I don't know how much of the profession is leaving. I don't know. That would be an interesting question to ask maybe the ALA, to see who is what the percentage is. But I think that things have changed. And so libraries are starting to partner with social services. I do know that one of our branches at one point, and I'm not sure they still do, but for a couple of years, they had a social worker coming in a couple of times a week to work with patrons who needed that kind of help. So let's see. What are the biggest pieces of advice that you would give for a new MLIS grad looking to score their first librarian in a public library? And I'll, Tyrell, I'll go with both of your questions, but the first one I want to talk about, I am, as you know, an extra help librarian, and that is a fancy word for a substitute. I have tried several times to get permanent positions, and we'll see. I actually interviewed yesterday afternoon for an adult services part-time position, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It went really, really well. Because I've been extra help, I know every single person just about in the library. All of the panel knew me. They're all branch managers that have worked with me, so they know my work. But I would recommend trying to get extra help positions. What I'm finding, and others of you may know this, is that not only libraries but other businesses are trying to cut down on the amount of full-time employees they have. I've seen this across the board in organizations, that it's easier to do part-time, a bunch of part-time where you don't have to pay the benefits or pension or whatever. And so I think that is a very scary thing to see too. It's disturbing for me. But I would say try and do extra help, or the other thing I've seen librarians do coming out of grad school is they've gone into like a library associate position, which doesn't require an MLIS, but does give you a lot of expertise, a lot of experience that you will need to move up a level. And it is much easier to get from a library associate to a librarian position because you're already in the system. They don't seem to count extra help as being in the system. So when they're looking at transferring people from one branch to another and there's an opening for a position, they look at the people who want to transfer rather than the people who are outside. And so it's getting that foot in the door. So I would say if you if you're working at a public library as a library specialist, for instance, and you're wanting to move up, go into the library associate if you can, even before librarian, because it's easier. And as a public librarian, have you had to handle potential book challenges by patrons? I personally have not. However, I know that they exist. The one time I had somebody who was concerned about a book, I had them fill out a patron comment card and turn it in, because we have a very strict policy on it. Goes that comment card will go to upper management as it needs to. We've had issues where recently we had drag queen story time at a few of the branches, and a whole group of people showed up from some other county, not even ours, from some organization. There were like 100 of them that showed up, and they were outside the library. They weren't allowed to come in and protest, but they were outside the library and being there. And so a whole bunch of librarians and other allies showed up at that same area, you know. And so these 2 or 3 branches that were holding the story time were, I mean, there was certainly some nervousness, but it went on as planned. And you can run into that sort of thing too. In June, on Pride Month, for Pride Month, somebody checked out all of the Pride books that were on display in one of our branches. Now, to be fair, they brought them back eventually, which we didn't think we'd see them again. But in the meantime, the library had gotten donors to give them all the books back, you know. So they didn't lose any money. However, it is happening even in Sonoma County, which is one of the most liberal counties in California, I think. And book challenges are going to happen. If you haven't got a subscription yet to the American Library Association magazine, that has a really good article in it this month that is addressing what librarians are doing to fight back against these bans. And a lot of what they're doing is changing policies. So in one library system, they've changed it so that if you challenge a book and it gets banned, if you challenge a book and the library decides that they're going to keep it anyway, you cannot challenge that book cannot be challenged for another 5 years. And I really like that. I really like that. But there are librarians that are being fired for their policies. There are directors that have been fired. There are libraries that have been closed. There, you know, I mean, book banning and book challenges are definitely with us. And there's lawsuits that happen. You know, that there's organizations that are starting to take on lawsuits against the people who are trying to ban books. And so we're going to see this more and more. It's just the nature of the beast. Probably won't find that in medical libraries, for instance, because they're not going to ban biology books, right? Or let's see, what next? What can we do to address the digital divide and make sure all patrons have access to information and technology resources? And that is an excellent question. Our library system, and I think many others do, have these portable Wi-Fi hotspots. And they can get checked out for 3 weeks at a time. We also have Chromebooks that have internet built into them so they can be used. The digital divide is something that every library struggles with because they want to make it as simple as possible for people to have access. And I think it also takes working with the city or the county that the library resides in, because it's really also up to the county to try and make sure there's access for people in their own homes, right? They can always come to the library and use our computers and have that access, but if they're not technologically advanced, it's also difficult. So the other thing we do is we have one-on-one tech hours with people. Seniors especially will get new devices and need help in getting them, you know, understanding how to download something onto them, or just in general, how to use them. And so many of the librarians now are offering these one-on-ones for half an hour or an hour each time. I'd be interested in hearing from any of you who already work in libraries, what your libraries are doing. Yes, Jen.
Our library is talking about getting hotspots, but I know they haven't actually done that yet. I know San Jose Public Library System has hotspots available for their patrons to borrow. The library system I work for is Santa Clara County Library District, and we have, you know, the bookmobile that goes out to patrons who otherwise wouldn't have access to services.
Good point.
And I think that's really helpful. But it's not really the digital divide, is it? It's more just access.
Well, access is important of all kinds. So
Yes.
yes, we have a Bibliobus, and it goes to senior centers and it goes to other events that are happening around the county. And so that helps. And it has Wi-Fi, which hadn't occurred to me until just now, that it probably people who are around there then can use the Wi-Fi from the library, from the Bibliobus. Let's see. Paula says, I work in a public library as a part-time page. Used to work in general services, so encountering people dealing mental health issues. Yes. Yeah, and it's hard. With the security people we have, some of them are better than others, and they're not there all the time. And they also have to take lunch and breaks. And so it usually occurs when they're on lunch or breaks. We've had patrons not want to leave the library at the end of the day. And sometimes we've had to stay open just to get them out. And that can be dangerous. And sometimes we've had security and sometimes we haven't. But you always have to have at least 2 people, if not 3, at the end of the day in any branch, really, except that one I was telling you about where you're the only librarian, you can't do anything about it. But you're supposed to work in teams with people, particularly if they seem to be threatening. You don't ever approach someone by yourself in those kinds of situations. You have to have, even if the other person doesn't say anything, if they're just there as a presence, that can diffuse a situation. But I've seen some hard ones. Yeah. Let's see. I have been working as an intern in a public library in the Bay Area since March. It's ending in November. Yeah. And yes, Sonoma County Library is run by the county. We have a wonderful board. We have a wonderful set of commissioners. We've got huge support from the Friends of the Library at every branch. So that's been much beloved for the community support. And the reason we've been able to do as much as we have is that we passed Measure Y back in 2015 or 2016 that goes for 10 years. And we're trying, obviously, now to work on the next generation of it. It's a property tax, I believe. And it's really, it means we can open 7 days a week, even though it may not be 9 hours every day. It's 5 hours, for instance, on Sundays. And then we work from 10 till 8, 2 days a week, and 10 to 6 the others. So we really have been very blessed up here. And I know not all library systems have that. I know rural libraries aren't going to have that support. So let's see.
That's the way Santa Clara County Library District is as well. It's all tax-based, and so they have that financial backing along with the Friends and everything. So.
Paula, you asked a great question. How did I know that I wanted to work as a public librarian? Are there any organizations, internships, or classes you recommend? Yes. So when I first started library school, I only knew about public libraries. I did not know about what we called special libraries, didn't know what that term meant. So I had always assumed I would work as a public librarian when I got in. But then I learned about academic libraries. I learned about music libraries. I learned about libraries on human rights. There's a library in Sweden that is on, it's called the Human Rights Library. There's libraries on boats. There's libraries for the Navy. There's libraries for the military of all branches. There's the Disney Research Library. I wouldn't mind working there either. The Library of Congress, of course, is considered a public library, but it's also a special library in a lot of ways. So there's so many different directions you can go. And when I first started the MLIS program back in 2016, I guess that would have been, it was just overwhelmed with how much you can learn. And you can't take all the classes because they really do limit you to 43 units. That's it. You can't take more than 43 units. And I ran out of time to take more classes. So yes, Info 210 is absolutely essential if you want to be a public librarian. I would also say that you would take the public library path, but don't necessarily just limit yourself. I wish now that I'd had the time to take youth services or adult services. I wish I'd taken classes. I took general library classes and didn't try to specialize in anything, which I think can bite you. It really can. Especially if you want to go into a special library, because they go, well, do you have any experience in law? Do you have any experience in this business? Do you have any experience in, the medical field? But public librarians, it's a little bit easier. However, I would say, depending on what aspect of reference librarianship you want, take youth library services, take the reference and information services, take how to search. So I think that's Info 248, or that's cataloging, right? 244 was online searching, if I recall. I took all of those and have used everything to a large degree. Not the cataloging so much, because they have a special cataloging section of the library that I'm not in, but everything else I found. I ended up working for 6 months in the role of children's librarian when the actual children's librarian was out on medical leave. And I learned how to do collections management. I was in charge of weeding that children's section. I was in charge of doing some purchasing. I was learning how to run reports and all the things that gosh, they can't cover everything in the library school. They can't. And so what I really have picked up since library school is how careful you have to be to make sure that you are allowing the voices of everyone to speak in your materials, in your collection. It can't just be straight white males. It never should have been. But you have to make sure that you are representing everybody in your community and beyond, because you want to bring people in, right, to see themselves in the library. And I've become very aware of books on our presidents, for instance, Washington and Jefferson. And I started pulling books out of our collection because they had like one sentence on, oh, George Washington had slaves, but he freed them after he died. Or Thomas Jefferson had slaves, but they don't talk about the fact that he had fathered a lot of them, They just talked about how wonderful these people were. And there needs to be some real history in the book. So we have done a lot of work on that. And we have, so it's really key to be aware when you are in library school that you need to learn, and I don't know which classes teach that, you need to be aware of what voices are being silenced and which ones need to be brought in to the equation. So let's see. Yeah, Professor Tunyon was fantastic. Let's see, Tyrell. When I first started my position, well, I think I was most surprised at the types of questions I was getting all the time, all these technical ones that I had barely learned. I hadn't really learned about the e-resources at the library before I was hired. I mean, I knew about 20 of them maybe. And that's one thing that you should do before you apply to any library, and probably this is good for any business, is you go onto the website and you find out what their e-resources are and you start exploring them then. And then when you go into the interview, then you can have something to talk about. And you can say, oh, I'm really pleased to know that you are expanding your services to the Hispanic community. And I see that you've got Make and you've got Bookflix and you've got, all these other tutorials and things for people who want to learn Spanish and, that sort of thing. So it's really, really important to do that before you get in. So Tyrell, did I cover your question pretty well? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Did the governor of California pass a no book banning law recently? Jen, I think he did something to that effect. And Marissa, you put that in. Oh, okay. Yeah, books in school libraries. As I say, that would be great if he banned book banning altogether. But I think that's just going to be on a library basis, case by case, where you have to change the policies to disallow that. Yeah. Let's see, what else am I missing? How do you suggest building collection development experience? Honestly, the only way you can do it is to be allowed to do it. And in part, I started as helping with weeding, which is a terrible word, but it's where the librarian has already determined what books haven't been looked at in so long. Maybe and it has to do with the space of the branch as well. Some branches, you get to keep the book on the shelf for 3 years before if it hasn't been checked out 3 years. Others are 1 year. It also has to do with how old the book is and how many checkouts it had before it was, maybe nobody's reading it anymore because it's outdated, so you pull it off. But there are books you have to keep on. And really, I think it takes talking to the librarian who is in charge of that collection and talking to the people who are in charge of kind of finding the e-resources. If you can get on, once you're hired, if you can get on to a library group that does reference research, what do we want to bring into the library for e-resources? What do we want to have in our overall collections? Read the New York Times bestsellers and see what books look good there. If you're wanting to see what your library has picked up. But it does take a lot of talking to people to get good at it. And I am eager to get this adult services position so that I can learn a lot more than I already have, which, 6 months of doing it is not enough to really be considered an expert on anything. Let's see, that would be what I would say about collection development experiences. You have to be in the right place at the right time and hope that they allow you to do it. So let's see, online searching. Yeah, fantastic. I had a woman who was not I think she was like an adjunct, because she was coming in, and I don't remember her name, and she was fantastic. But it's been since 2017 or 2018 when I took her class. So if anybody remembers, if anybody on this call remembers anybody, Jean, it was Jean something. Okay, so I don't see any more questions in the chat. Is there anything that I haven't covered that you want to find out about?
Yeah, I think so. It seems like we don't have any more questions. Please feel free to type any as I'm saying this, just in case you have a last minute thought that you've come up with and you want to ask something. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and wind down and probably close out our presentation today. And I would like to first, of course, thank Amy for coming to speak with us. We definitely value the opinions you've given us and the advice and all the questions you answered. Definitely quite a few questions. So thank you for answering all of those.
Oh, you're welcome.
They were all of your answers were very detailed and very helpful for all of us.
I put my email in case you want to write me ever. I did type that in, right? No, I did not. That's what happens when you're okay. I misspelled my last name, so pay attention to the second time, not the first. But I'm really glad that you all came. I am very happy to do this. I've never done a roundtable or a presentation, so I'm excited for the library, and it's very exciting. And I wish you all well in your studies, because it is a wonderful profession. It can be very rewarding. I know I've told you about some scary things, but it really, really is very rewarding. And I hope you find just the right place for yourselves.
All right. And I would like to again thank everyone for coming out today, and anyone who's viewing this recording. Please feel free if you have any other questions. Amy has her email posted in the chat. We'll be sure to also include that, so that if you have any questions and you were only able to watch the recording, you're still able to ask some. So yeah. All right. Thank you everyone for attending. We'll go ahead and close out the meeting, and this recording should be available soon, so keep a lookout.
Okay.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Amy.
Thank you.